Is it going on?
It appears that
it says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. I see it.
Does? Okay, yes, cool.
It's live on Facebook. Hi, everybody.
Okay, there's is your mother Sherry?
Yes, she's probably watching on Facebook then.
Yeah, she's here now too.
Oh, hi, Mom.
She's kept me on. Hey, let me see if I can.
Okay, then we should probably get started if we're live on Facebook.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. It is wonderful to have you joining us and to be part of our author program this evening. I'm very excited to have Sherry, I'm sorry, I'm looking at your mother's name, having Shannon Brescher Shea join us this evening to talk about her new book, Growing Sustainably Together. There she is. My name is Debbie Cohen. I'm the owner of the Story House in Rockville, Maryland, and I am just very excited to have you guys join. We're going to start with Shannon reading from her book, and then we'll have some time for questions. It's a pretty small group, so we'll probably be able to open it up for questions to the group, or you can always write a question in chat. And I'm going to ask everybody to please keep themselves on mute, just so we're able to hear Shannon talk, and in case the phone goes off or whatever, that would be wonderful. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you, Shannon. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to come and join us this evening.
Of course. And if for folks on Facebook, I'm going to try to look at mute yourself. I'm going to try to see as it goes on for those on Facebook. Oh, here we go. If you have any questions on Facebook. So here we go. Oh, I don't want to. Okay. It goes on for those. There you go. So I will keep an eye on the Facebook questions as well. But I'm going to start with reading an excerpt from my book about using storytelling to talk to kids about difficult environmental concepts. And when I mean difficult, not necessarily scientifically complex, although they are often those as well, but emotionally difficult. We're all going through a lot of very emotionally difficult times at the moment, between, obviously COVID, as well as the deep conversations going on around racial justice. And then of course, climate change, and it adds that mix in terms of things that are just hard to talk about. And so one way into that is storytelling. And so I'm going to read from my book. It's from actually the very last chapter, which is called Envisioning a Sustainable Future. And just for a little bit of context, so every chapter in this book is about a different environmental topic, from sustainable food and talking about the larger food system, sustainable transportation, biking, walking, and public transit, saving energy, reducing waste, anti-materialism, outdoor volunteerism, environmental activism, which is very relevant these days, of course, and then this last one, which is about thinking about how we create a future together and what that will look like. And so, telling stories is a good path into discussing hard subjects while avoiding didactic lectures that shut down two-way conversation. In addition, stories fundamentally help us process and make meaning from events, offering a way into developing meaning-focused coping. That's one of the ways of coping that I talk about early in the chapter. That's one of the healthiest ways of dealing with these difficult subjects, is making meaning out of them rather than just avoiding them or trying kind of frantically to solve the problem on your own. But if news stories about climate change are so apocalyptic, what's a better way to frame them? Considering the problems at hand, everything can't be flowers and sunshine. Plus, stories with negative aspects are more interesting and dramatic. Fortunately, there are a number of different approaches we can take that are both realistic and empowering. Making a local connection can help people feel like they can and should do something. Researchers found that discussing local impacts was the most likely to make climate change feel relevant to people. For children, telling stories about small but significant local impacts of climate change or habitat loss can help them grasp the concept without being overwhelmed by it. Connect the effects with some way of finding hope or the potential to reduce the impact, especially locally. Another way of talking about climate change is to frame it as a readiness story rather than a disaster-based one. Heather Toney, who works for Moms Clean Air Force, a major climate change organization focused specifically on the power of parents to make a difference, compared talking to children about climate change to running a fire drill. Kids are adaptive and they're resilient in their own right, she said. If we're talking to them as if this is the end of the world, that's what they're going to think. If we talk to them as if these things are things we need to do to protect ourselves, that's what they're going to think. She described how growing up as a child in Mississippi, she frequently had tornado drills at school. The drills taught her to be prepared without constantly being scared of the threat. From an advocacy perspective, Tony added that it's important to take action while also preparing our children. She compared it how she simultaneously works to take political action on gun violence and racial justice, while also having serious conversations with her sons, who are Black, about interactions with guns and the police. I'm going to teach them as children and what they need to do. Make sure they are prepared, she said. But at the same time, I'm going to advocate that they are in safe spaces. Climate is no different. Similarly, journalist Michelle Nijhuis said that while parents want to be truthful with their children, they should also emphasize how we're working to keep them safe. You want to remind them that's part of who you are, she said. One way to integrate a family story into the bigger picture of the environment is for parents to talk about ways they made a difference in their communities when they were kids. Children from 8 to 12 enjoy hearing stories about their parents' childhoods, especially how they handled different challenges. Like teenagers, preteens don't process negative emotions well by themselves. They need parent support and guidance. As a result, listening to other stories that validate their own experiences is important to them. Telling our own stories and the meaning we found in those experiences growing up can help them see the difference they can make and the potential meaning behind it. Personally, I found it really powerful to share the story about how I became a third grade environmental activist after I fell in love with manatees and found out that they were endangered with my older son. While my husband is less of a go-getter, he too has relevant stories about how he made his community a better place, including volunteering with Boy Scouts when he pointed out to the Boy Scout group that they needed to clean up a stream because a local construction company was dumping garbage in it. Beyond our own stories, reading and listening to stories of people doing this work who are similar to our children can inspire and encourage them. The 2019 Moms Clean Air Force Play-In for the Climate, which is a big event they have every year, had a training session specifically for teenagers. Alexandra Villeneuve, the 14-year-old co-leader of the US climate strike, spoke to participants about her experience. They asked her questions about protesting, including the consequences for skipping school to participate. Likewise, Michelle Nijhuis said that her daughter finally started asking questions about climate change after hearing about teenage activist Greta Thunberg and watching a video featuring teenagers from the Alliance for Climate Education. Teenagers neither gloss over the problems nor present them as impossible to defeat. Hearing about these young people's accomplishments can be particularly empowering. Talking about success stories can help children see there's a path forward, even with problems that seem impossible to tackle. Emily Edmonds Langham, who works for the American Museum of Natural History and works with children on environmental education, said, "They can see themselves in that story and feel like they have an active role and can participate in these massive movements." But perhaps the most empowering stories are the ones that we tell ourselves about ourselves. Parents influence the stories that children internalize. Telling children stories of both their positive and negative life experiences and how they dealt with them helps them build resilience. These stories can provide children with inner reserve of strength they can draw on in difficult times. Sharing these stories early and often helps children cope with future challenges, including environmental issues. Working together with our children, we can develop a collective vision of our future. Thinking of it together helps reinforce the message that we as adults are supporting them, not just leaving the mess we left them to clean up. As Michelle Nijhuis said, we should really be careful about making them feel like they're responsible for our neglect. We're still walking around. We're still on the job. We can only approach problems and make meaning together. It's too lonely otherwise. Fortunately, we're all still telling the story of the environment and the role we have to play in it. Much of the story is written, but the ending isn't finished yet. We are the characters in our own stories, and we have the opportunity to make our own meaning. We can tell the stories we want to hear and find ways towards the endings we want to see. while there is no guarantee of a happy ending, we can still find hope and joy in the very act of loving each other and taking care of our collective home. So that's from Growing Sustainable Together, available at the Story House and Dawson's Market. So I'm going to take a look at Facebook and see if anybody has asked any questions. Not yet, but that's okay. Oh, Debbie, you are muted.
I was good about muting myself and then I forgot about it. If anybody has any questions, and we have a small group here, please feel free to like raise your hand or just jump in and ask the question or type it into our chat function.
Absolutely. And I believe you had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Also.
So tell us a little bit about how this book came to be. I know that you've been blogging for a long time, but how did you decide to write a book, and why this book?
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to write a book since I was a little kid. When I was, again, in third grade, I had a thing about third grade, I guess, very important year for me. I decided, well, it was after the manatee thing. I went to Florida and we went to Homosassa Springs State Park and I fell in love with manatees. They were just the best. And I also, on the same day, discovered they were endangered and was like, wait, what? How can these things possibly like not exist in the future? How is that a thing? And so I decided I was going to take action. But around that same time, I decided I was going to have two careers. I was going to be a marine biologist in the summer because that's when you went on the boat. And I was going to be a famous writer in the winter because you obviously can't go on the boat in the winter. It's too cold. So I joke to say that I am an environmental and science writer now. And this is actually sort of my side gig. In my day job, I'm a science writer. And it's about as close as you can get to my third grade vision of the world, which for third grade was pretty good. And so I've always wanted to write a book. I didn't know what it was going to be about. I didn't have any topics for a book. I did know, though, that I wanted to at some point do it. And I had a completely different idea for a book on basically the same topic, which is this environmental parenting thing. But I was going to profile different people who were green. And I wrote a whole proposal. I was very, I don't. I wrote a whole proposal. I was very committed to writing this. And then I sent it off to an agent and he basically was like, this is nice, but no one will buy it. And I realized I was only answering a question that only I cared about. And so I talk about in the introduction to the book how one of the things I struggled with, and one of the reasons I wrote that first proposal was because I really felt torn between the sort of time spent doing activism and green living things and, spending more time doing that sort of thing and parenting. It felt like, oh, I'm taking away from my kids to do these things. Is it bad that I'm in the garden rather than, whatever? And I realized one day while I was reading a different parenting book that no, these things are compatible. And in fact, I asked a bunch of people about this, other parents who consider themselves green, and they're like, no, there's no conflict. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was really confused about it for a while. And then I put down this parenting book and realized that the reason there was no conflict was because so many of these activities have positive things that you can use to teach your children. That gardening teaches resilience and patience, so much patience, and hard work, and understanding where your food comes from, and ecology, and you can even use it to teach things like math. Biking and walking places connects you with your neighborhood, with your neighbors, with actually getting outside. Activism teaches you to be empowered in your local government, in your state government, to have an understanding of systems of power and how they work and how you can influence them. And so all these things I realized were things I wanted my children to know. I wanted to teach them. And by involving them in these activities, that they were going to be better world citizens. They were going to be better people, not just green. It was just my whole tagline for this is it's not just good for the environment or for the earth, but it's good for your family, it's good for your community, and it's good for the world. It's not just about saving polar bears, it's also about caring about your neighbors and learning how to be connected and to be kinder and to be more engaged. And I thought other people would appreciate that message and know about that as well.
The book itself, I mean, there's so much information in it and so many different ideas. And I know that, like, for myself, sometimes, like, I like to start small with something, especially with kids. It's really a lifestyle approach that you're describing in the book. Um, how would you suggest, like, a first step that families might want to take to be able to incorporate some of the lessons of what you talk about in your book into their lives?
Absolutely. I think people, and I talk about this because I don't want to have anybody have that green guilt that I had, which was I was just sort of getting overwhelmed by a combination of green guilt and parenting guilt. And the combination of the two was especially bad. And so finding something that you're passionate about, your kids are interested in, and that you have sort of the resources to do. Because admittedly, some green living things do take more resources than others. Um, and I know that's something I've struggled with a lot of things on, especially like waste conservation. Buying in bulk is great. Not using paper towels is great, but it does create more dishes and more laundry, both of which are things that most people struggle with already. So finding something that fits pretty well, maybe it'll take a little more time and effort, but fits your family's values really well and that you just enjoy. That's something that you want to do together, and start there. And you can either dig in really deep into that one thing. A lot of people are just really hardcore into one thing, or you can use it as a jumping off point to look at different aspects of your life. So that's why I talk about all these things. Not that everybody's going to be able to do all of them. We have a car. We don't bike and walk everywhere. We produce garbage. We are not the people who have a mason jar at the end of the month, sadly, or the end of the year. Sadly, no. I wish we were, but no. Even I don't do everything, but nobody can, there's the old saying, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And I think a lot of the green movement has focused on these little things like bring your garbage bag, bring your bags to the market, which is great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but looking at little things that have a sort of more of a ripple effect, that make you think about how you fit in these bigger systems. For example, yes, you riding the bus individually is probably not going to have a huge difference in your carbon footprint, but it supports the bus system. It helps your kids learn about public transit. It connects you to your neighbors, So those are the things I really tried to focus on that are not just good for the environment, but also have these bigger kind of systemic aspects to them and aren't that hard in many ways.
Right.
And again, some people, you're not going to be able to ride the bus because there's no bus. But maybe you could do something else instead. So it's going to be really individual what the answer to that question is. That was a long answer to that.
Do we have any? And I wanted to just, I don't want to monopolize all the time. If there's questions from the group, please jump in and ask.
Yep, and I'm checking Facebook. So if anybody on Facebook has questions, please, ask them.
So, well, we were talking about this a little bit before the program started, but we're like on month 4 or 5 of our kids being at home, and I know when you wrote this book, you were thinking that it was going to come out at a time of a pandemic with everybody's lifestyle already being severely impacted. Do you have ideas for during this time that we're struggling with the pandemic of incorporating some of the lessons from your book into life? I mean, I know the gardening and things like that are things we can do, but what has worked for you, for your family?
Yeah, so I think one thing about the pandemic is it has helped a lot of people sort of, I mean, it sounds so cliched, but to slow down, and I certainly appreciate what's directly around them. We have never spent so much time in our backyard, and we are extremely grateful to have a backyard, and not everybody does, of course. But we have really grown to appreciate it. My kids have gone around the yard and identified plants with the plant identification app. I didn't know what weeds we had in our yard. Apparently some of them are medicinal. Who knew? So one thing, yes, gardening has gotten very popular. It's a little late in the season to start one, but you can always start, some potted plants. Mint grows great in a pot. You don't want to plant mint in your yard anyway, because it spreads like a weed. Basil is great to grow in a pot, any of the herbs. I know beans can be good if you can put a stick in the pot so they can run up the stick. Um, although they do need to be they to actually get beans from it and not just grow a plant for the fun of growing a plant, you do need to have them pollinated. So they'd have to sit outside somewhere. Um, Biking and walking around your neighborhood can be very powerful right now, even though we're not going anywhere. Just being familiar with, what are the sidewalks in our neighborhood like? Or if we don't have sidewalks, where does the sidewalk end? Which I've come across places where it just ends and then you can't walk any further, even though that's not where you were going. Where are the streets that are good to bike on? So when we have the chance to finally go places again, we'll be familiar enough with how to get to them. Using these other methods, especially because some of us, at least, have a little more time than we had before to get places, or just free time that we got to find something to fill with our kids. A lot of them, there's some like home conservation activities, keeping track of your waste for a day, keeping track of there's a like a an energy scavenger hunt in there that's basically like a kid's version of an energy audit. Those are all things you can do in your house, really easy. We can still write and in some cases call our local officials. So emailing, your local city council member or mayor or county council about, hey, what are you doing about this environmental issue? And if you have a kid say they wrote it and sign it, they'll probably get a response. And that's really empowering to know people are actually listening to you. So there's a lot we can still do from home. It is harder to connect with our neighbors. That biking and walking is one way. I've seen a lot of people come and go, as we've been out in our yard, our friends walking to the park and, hey, socially distance hi from across the street. So that aspect of it is difficult, but most of them are things you can actually do at home.
See if we have any. I'm going to see what's going on with chat quickly. Oh, we do have a. Okay, this is from Sandy Schwartz.
Mm-hmm.
After writing this book, are you inspired to write another book? And if so, what would the topic be? Did you discover anything in your research that stuck out that you want to dig in more?
Honestly, I don't know. This is a really good question, Sandy. Sandy is also a writer. And shout out, Sandy just got a book deal too. Yay! It's about using nature for your family's mental and emotional health. It took me so long to kind of make sense of what this book was going to be, and then I was able to write it very quickly because I wrote this very comprehensive proposal. And so not everybody knows about book publishing, but I got the book deal in April, and then they asked me to have it done by Halloween, which is very fast, especially if you have a full-time job and are also, raising 2 children. So I took all my annual leave and wrote it on weekends and wrote it at night after the kids went to bed. And I just feel like I dumped like everything I know into this book for now. I used to write more. 2 of my big passions, if people can't tell, are sustainable food and sustainable transportation, particularly biking and walking. Mainly because I think they have such big ripple effects, not just environmentally, but also in terms of, social justice, in terms of who has access to these things, in terms of how we treat the people who like produce our food and who, provide us transportation, in terms of our communities, how our communities are built when you talk about transportation. And so it would probably be, and the blog I wrote before I wrote my parenting blog was specifically on bicycling and sustainable food. So it would probably be on one of those topics, just because I know the most about them and I sort of see the bigger picture of those. I also really liked writing about youth activism, and I think that's a really exciting topic. So perhaps something on that thing. And there's a couple good books out there. I recommend them in the back of the book. There's one called, I think it's called You Are Mighty, which is a guide for kids being activists, which I thought was really cool. But I think also, yeah, You Are Mighty, A Guide to Changing the World. And I think also like books on, kids who are something about kids who are activists or stuff like that would be, I think, pretty interesting. but I'm not planning on doing it anytime soon because I'm very tired. this was a this was a sprinted marathon, you know, starting last April and leading up to now. So
Um, you talked a lot about stories and what you presented, and I'm somewhat of a book person. Um, are there picture books or storybooks that you've shared with your children, or you just know about, that you think kind of lend themselves to the approach that you're taking? Are there any hidden gems that that you'd love to share with us?
yes, absolutely. And I have at the end of each chapter, so the way the book is structured, there's a lead up. The majority of the book is sort of about the benefits of these things to your family and benefits of how it helps you raise, you know, kinder kids. Um, and I combine personal stories, sort of expert opinions, and then some observational work I did where I went to actual schools and observed some of this sort of thing, and social science research. But then at the end of each chapter, I have really practical tips for doing these things and a list of recommended books, which does include picture books. Um, and it really depends on the topic, but in terms of hidden gems, for gardening, I love Up in the Garden, Down in the Dirt. My kids, usually in the springtime, are kind of obsessed with that book. It's got these gorgeous illustrations, it's got this wonderful poetry, and it's about this little girl like gardening with her grandmother. And it leads you through the seasons, which is really lovely. Um, for biking and walking, there's a really lovely book called Sidewalk Flowers, which is a wordless picture book about a little girl walking with her dad, and her dad's kind of occupied and he's like looking at his phone, and he's, you know, and she is like very intently focused on everything she comes across as she walks, and she picks up flowers and gives them to people. And it's just about the power of how walking can slow us down and help us see things that we wouldn't ordinarily see, and in process connect us to other people and to our communities. um, in terms of like energy conservation, there's a great book. It's a little wordy, but I think it's really cool, called Energy Island. It's Energy Island, how one community, I don't remember the rest of the title. It's about this, how one community harnessed the wind and changed their world. It's about an island in Denmark that switched to 100% renewable energy, and how the citizens advocated for that and were able to make that change. Not just the like, yay, and then they switched and it was done, but it's the actual story of how they made that change. And the author has another book called Pedal Power that's about the Netherlands, and how people in the Netherlands did activism, including like direct activism, like blocking roads and stuff. It involved children to make bicycling safe, because they had a number of biking fatalities. Like they were built around cars the same way we were, and they had a number of biking fatalities, including a child, and they had this huge activist effort, and that's why they're so bike friendly. It wasn't just because they designed it that way, it's because people pushed it. So that author has written two really nice books about those sorts of things. Like I said, they're both a little wordy, so they're not for really little kids, because they're kind of like, they require some attention, but they're really nice. In terms of anti-materialism, oh, I know a lot of people know this book and love this book, but it's a great book. Last Stop on Market Street, which is about a boy and his grandmother, and they get on the bus, and the boy asks like, why don't I have an iPod? And the mother and the grandmother's like, well, because you get to listen to that dude playing on the guitar and things like that. And then at the end of the book, they go in there volunteering at a soup kitchen, and it's really a lovely book. Environmental volunteerism, there's a great book called Spring After Spring about Rachel Carson, who's my personal sort of career hero. She was also a federal employee before she wrote a book that changed the world, so you can see why maybe I relate. And then in terms of activism, the that You Are Mighty, I thought was a really good introduction. Oh, and so a lot of people, again, a lot of people do know these books, but they're terrific. Sofia Valdez, Future Prez, which is by the same author as Rosie Revere, Engineer, and Iggy Peck, Architect, and oh, what's the one about the scientist? Ada Twist, Scientist. Mm-hmm. They have great, her and the co-author have great books. And this one's about a little girl who is an activist. Her, reminded me a little bit of Parks and Rec. Her grandfather falls at like trips over something in a garbage dump and they decide to make it into a park. And there's one part where she goes home and she's about to go to bed and she remembers the community meeting and she realizes that the adults expect her to do everything. And she's like, wait, what? No, I can't do that. I'm like, oh, I relate. I understand. I've been to those meetings. So those are all great ones.
That's
That was
wonderful.
a lot of them. Sorry, that's probably too many.
That was great. That was terrific. That was a wonderful list.
There's way more recommendations. There's like 4 or 5 at least picture books for each chapter.
Questions from the group?
I'm not seeing any of them on Facebook. We have had some people join, but I don't see any questions yet. So people on Facebook, if you have questions, please ask them. More people here on Zoom.
Well, I know that you have children of your own. Do you have an example of something that you wrote about in the book that you've used at home that's been just, like a real success story for you, or something maybe that you weren't expecting a particular outcome and it went in a different direction than you thought it might?
Yeah. So my kids love gardening, even though they're not always the most helpful. They're often helpful. They're a lot more helpful than they were when they were little. And they love gardening. And one time for Mother's Day, my younger son wrote on his preschool thing that his favorite thing about mommy was that she lets me help in the garden. And I was like, that's really? Okay. Not like she tells me great stories or she texts me and she lets me help in the garden. I'm like, okay. My husband got that he was funny. So, which he is. In terms of things that I learned from the book that then I implemented, I wrote the whole chapter on energy conservation and waste reduction. I draw a lot in the social science literature about chores and getting kids involved early and often in household responsibilities. And so I'm like, well, I should really, practice what I preach. And so we started all doing chores together. And so on Sunday afternoons, and this isn't particularly environmental, but it is helpful. On Sunday afternoons, it's only a half hour because my kids are 4 and 7, but we spend a half hour all cleaning the house together. And my older son vacuums the living room, and my younger son and I usually clean the bathroom because those are the 2 things that absolutely have to be done at least weekly. Should probably be more often, but at least it's getting done weekly. And they're learning valuable skills, and they're learning that they do in fact have to contribute to the household, and it's not just up to us. And they found that the kids and we're doing it together. That's the other thing, was they looked at, some social science researchers looked at societies in different places where kids were expected to contribute. And they found the ones that kids actually wanted to contribute and learn something from it were the ones where the parents and the kids did it together. And the parents talked about like how to do it and then give the kids independence to do it on their own without like micromanaging them. And that was, I read this one story. It was reported originally in the social science literature, but then in the New Yorker. And it talks about, so-and-so, this little girl, this person, went, and she went on this trip down the Amazon River with her family, and they were gathering these leaves, and she, wasn't big enough to go do that and work with the machete. So she caught like basically crayfish, all the crayfish, and then put boil onto water and made dinner for the family. And she was only 5. And then they compare that to the kids in like LA who are like, where's my fork? The 10-year-old sitting down to dinner. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'd rather be more like, we don't live in the Amazon, but we want to have at least some of those values. And so that helped me see, it was because they had involved the kids from an early age. It's because they encouraged them. It was because they had respected them as contributing to the household, that they were able to have this independence. And they found kids that did chores felt more independent and were more responsible as adults too, which was really striking. So that was the one thing that we hadn't really done before that I'm like, better start doing that.
Let me see. Okay. Okay, that is my son Ezra, who is sharing his beloved squirrel toy with the group. Um, for people who have kids that are a little bit older and maybe very connected to their screens, this is something that I have in my own household. Um, do you have ideas on getting them to either maybe not get off of the screens, but use the screens in a way that are supportive of the message of your book and the approach?
Absolutely. And right now we kind of have to do that because we don't
Good.
have a lot of choices. It's funny, we were watching Wally and, which seemed very striking right now. The Pixar movie, and all the people are like attached to their screens and never like looking at anybody else. And I'm like, well, screens aren't all bad because it's the only way we've got to connect right now to so many people. And so, researching environmental issues, figuring out things they really care about, finding a passion. Do they love animals? Do they love wetlands? Do they love biking and walking? Do they love, getting solar power? And so finding an environmental issue and researching it, internet is the best for that, obviously.
Right.
So that's great. Again, you can contact elected officials via email. And then in terms of sort of connecting to nature and things like that, there's a couple of really neat apps. Like I said, we've been using this plant identification app. I don't remember the name of it. But you can take a picture of the plant and it tells you what it is. And then you can look up, like, is this an edible plant? Is it good for pollinators? That sort of thing. So we've had fun with that in our yard.
It sounds like it would be great for walks.
Sorry?
That would be great for walks.
Yeah, it's really good for that. And a lot of the activist work, especially a lot of the youth activist work, is mainly online. There's a lot of really great trainings, especially for older kids, through the Sunrise Movement, which is mainly high schoolers and college students, and through the Youth Climate Strike as well. The Alliance for Climate Education, which I mentioned, has some really fantastic videos that they designed specifically for like kind of middle school, young high school age. I think they could go up or down a little bit, but I think their general target audience is like middle to junior high school. I think that's mostly it. I mean, there's probably other stuff, but that's what I've got off the top of my head.
Well, thank you so much for the time you've given us. And before we say goodbye for the evening, I just wanted to see if anybody had any other questions, any questions from the group, comments, feedback. It's a small enough group that it can be something of a discussion if anybody wants to chime in.
Yeah, and I don't see any comments on Facebook. So if you are on Facebook and watching, and then of course I'm also Debbie, hopefully you're gonna oh, we didn't record it. We should have recorded it. Oh, but on Facebook Live, it'll be saved on Facebook Live, and then I can download it hopefully. And so you'll be able to watch it on Facebook Live afterwards as well.
Okay, I'm gonna type into the chat the website for my bookstore in case you want to order the book, and it's also available at Dawson's Market. So if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, you can do so either of those two ways. I think it's a Penguin Random House book, and so it's also on their site as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat partnership, actually. My publisher is called North Atlantic Books, which is a small publisher based out of Berkeley, but they have a distribution partnership with Penguin Random House.
With Penguin Random House.
So I got the benefits of working with this small group of people who really paid a lot of attention to me and gave a lot of attention to my book, while also having sort of the reach of Penguin Random House, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, because it's on the Penguin Random House. I thought that was a particular imprint for Penguin Random House. I didn't realize it was a different publishing firm. That is a cool arrangement.
Yeah, which I didn't even know was a thing until I talked to the publisher. So that was pretty great. And I will drop the link to the bookshop site for Storyhouse and to the specific, to my book specifically, in the Facebook, and I can do it. I'm trying to do it right now. There we go.
The link to purchase on the Storyhouse website is right on the homepage of the Story House website.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. That because of this event, right? That makes sense. Okay. Yep. So if you go to that front page, and then I'll also drop it in, I'll drop both of them in the Facebook. Okay. Well, thank you so much for hosting me. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and
we look forward
if you haven't already. And I look for, and if you're watching this after the fact on Facebook, feel free to enter questions in the comments, and I will answer them afterwards.
And I look forward to hopefully maybe having a time in the future where we can get together at Dawson's Market and talk about your book in person and do an activity together and things like that. But thank you so much for sharing your book and your insights and all of that, and your time with us this evening. We really appreciate it. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining in.
Bye.
Bye-bye.